Hey, everybody. Thank you for joining us this week on this week's episode of Active Measures. I'm Julie Roginski here with Olga Lautman. And this week we are talking about the newsletter we posted yesterday about how the Kremlin infiltrated Fox News and other right-wing media in advance of the 2016 election. To remind everybody about why we're doing this series, Active Measures, it is because Donald Trump, about a month and a half ago, and throughout the course of the last 8 years, has called it the Russia hoax and talked about how Russia was not interfering in the election and how the whole thing was a hoax. And we want to remind people that not only was this not a hoax, but it was very real. It happened. Olga and I are documenting it again. And we'd like everybody to please go to either my Substack, Salty Politics, or to Olga's Substack, Unmasking Russia. And please take a look at our entire series. This is now chapter 6 that we're talking about today, which is how the Kremlin infiltrated right-wing media. Last week, we talked about how they infiltrated evangelicals. The week before, we talked about how they infiltrated the NRA, and so on and so forth. You can catch the entire series thus far on our Substacks. So, Olga, welcome, and welcome to
Hi.
everybody here in the United States and around the world who is joining us today. I am going to just start with a little point of privilege, which is that I was working at Fox News at I got there much before 2016, but I was there for the entire 2016 cycle. And by cycle, I mean this started much, much, much earlier than 2016. This started going back at least 5 years earlier, if not even before that. And I very clearly remember being the only Democrat, actually the only person at Fox News. I was one of the few liberals there, but the only person at Fox News who actually went on camera and looked straight into the camera the way I'm doing right now and saying what Fox was doing to Seth Rich's family, the poor DNC staffer who was murdered in Washington, D.C. Immediately, the Russians used Fox and other right-wing media to pretend that he was the leak at the DNC who gave the DNC documents to WikiLeaks. I remember being on a show with Maria Bartiromo when we had General Flynn on and asking him about why he was taking money from Russia Today and why he was sitting next to Vladimir Putin at the Russia Today 10-year gala in Moscow, and I thought his head was going to pop off his neck. He was so angry about that. But the reason I bring this up is it's not until you start putting all of this together then you understand that these people were at best useful idiots for the Kremlin. And not just Fox, but also whether it's Breitbart, or whether it's InfoWars Alex Jones, or whether it is all the different websites, Twitter and others Facebook, who were used by the Kremlin and infiltrated by the Kremlin to advance the Kremlin's mission. Why don't we just start at the beginning, Olga, and I'll let you go ahead. What do you make of how smart the Russians were to align themselves with this right-wing ecosystem? Because their mission was pretty much the same, which was to elect Donald Trump at all costs and to defeat Hillary Clinton at all costs. But in the midst of doing that, they forgot that they're American, and they sided with a hostile enemy of the United States to advance their mission, which was to elect Donald Trump. In some ways, I think knowing what they were doing, because there was a lot of overlap between RT, Russia Today, for instance, and some of these people. They would go on each other's networks. They would talk to each other. They would reprint, in the case of Alex Jones, over 1,000 times, reprinting RT's articles verbatim. So what do you make of this from start to finish?
Well, for starters, I just want to add something to why we're doing this.
Yeah.
It's not just the fact that, Trump is opening his mouth and, continuing to spew garbage and, disinformation. It's the fact that now he's weaponizing U.S. agencies, including what I would argue the Russian asset,
Yeah.
or at least a Kremlin loyalist, Tulsi Gabbard, and Pam Bondi to actually start investigations to prosecute anyone who has was involved in protecting America from
Right.
Russia's attack. So I just wanted to add that bit because I mean it's really important that right now this is where we are, where you had John Bolton's house, raided by the FBI, and you have a whole list of, CIA and intelligence officials under investigation for doing their job and protecting America. The second thing I will add before we get into this is the fault of the West because in 2008, Russia invaded Georgia, a sovereign country. um, Bush was on his way out, Obama was coming in, and I mean, literally, they were never held accountable. And the reason I'm saying this is because until the full-scale invasion and genocide of Ukraine in 2022, not even 2014, the West had never had a clear-cut policy on Russia, not like with the Cold War, where you knew the Soviet Union was the enemy. And as a result of this, not having this clear foreign policy that Russia is an adversary by running around and doing business deals and gas pipelines and everything as Russia committed atrocities in Georgia, invaded Ukraine, carried out the most egregious war crimes in Syria. Um, this is why people in America didn't understand fully and grasp what Russia was until the images started coming out after the full scale invasion in 22. So I just wanted to give that because if the United States and Europe had a very clear cut policy, painting Russia as a serious adversary, maybe Russia would have never been this successful in infiltrating every single aspect of US, society and politics and everything. Um, Now to get to this, I mean, look, they are not master strategists. Putin by no means is a master strategist. What they have realized, what the Soviet Union and the KGB really was successful, but not to the point. Now, one, they didn't have the technology to spread propaganda globally. I mean, I remember speaking with Oleg Kalugin, who ran Russia's KGB counterintelligence division. And he was happy if he could get an anti-Semitic article in like a local US paper, and I'm talking local, not national. For them, this was considered a successful operation. They never dreamed of being able to spread disinformation, fake news across the globe, tapping billions of people within a matter of minutes. Two, the Soviet Union didn't really have the money to pay Westerners, and because of the policy during the Cold War, people understood if you're collaborating with the Soviet Union, you are a traitor to your country, which deterred people, to some extent. We had cases, but not like what we're seeing now. Um, now, Russia has countless, endless stream of money, trillions, um, and understands that greed is the main factor and that they could basically buy anyone and buying, journalists or providing them some kind of, favors, um, buying politicians and whatnot, that this pretty much can advance their goal and that these people don't care if they're working against their country. And three, the reason we see so much activity happening after 2008 was because of Obama's win during the election. Russia seeing the split and then seeing the Tea Party that, was so extreme that they were willing to go and lay in bed with anyone in order to achieve their goals. And this is why we got to this point. It's, the social media and then, regular media, and politicians. And it's this whole package that allowed Russia to be successful. And again, they're not strategists. They just found people who are willing, wittingly or unwittingly, to help with their agenda, not realizing that Russia's main goal is to destroy the United States. And anytime you're assisting them, you're helping them further this goal. So that's what I will say about that. And as far as the media, I mean, last week we did the Nazis, how Russia used the Nazis as useful tools to support Trump, and to, basically polarized more in the United States. The week before, NRA, the Republican Party, we did a few chapters back, and now the media. And, you know, what Fox News did, I mean, is horrific. You were there yourself. You saw that they were willingly putting out lies, indoctrinating their viewers with lies, in order to achieve the Republican Party's goal and their agenda of, taking power, and they're still doing it. Some of them were smarter, as we saw, from the emails where Sean Hannity basically after the insurrection said, that Trump is an idiot, but others, just didn't even realize. And then you have even mainstream media. I'll just close with this. You have mainstream media that consistently peddles Kremlin disinformation because they don't take the few seconds to actually put a normal title and put a disclosure. This information is coming from the Kremlin or, a Russian politician, and therefore must be taken with a grain of salt. And Russia uses even unwittingly journalists who don't realize the damage they're doing as when they put headlines. I remember one case I saw, that Russia's SVR, Foreign Intelligence Services, said that US was aiding and abetting ISIS, hiring them to send into Russia for terrorist attacks. The headlines screamed, the US is hiring ISIS terrorists to send to Russia. Why are you doing Russia's job for free? You don't need to have
Well, you
that
know,
that
the
headline.
the one thing that we did not talk about, yesterday in our newsletter, and I urge people to go back and read it, today because it's very, very long. And so we didn't I at least I did not think to put this in, when we were writing this together yesterday because it would have made it even longer. But, if you go back to how the Soviets handled their own domestic unrest to the extent that they had any kind of domestic unrest. Anytime somebody would say something about, even gingerly about, well, what about what's going on here? And there was anti-Semitism here, or there's and the Russians really were very awful to any ethnic minority. Their answer would always be, well, look at what's happening in the United States. Look at what's happening in New York. And they would go to Harlem was like the code word for urban squalor and awfulness and look what's happening and look at these race riots in New York and look at these race riots in the South and look at these race riots all across the United States and you think it's bad here, or look at what's happening there. And that was the case for decades, well before Vladimir Putin came to power.
Yeah,
That was the case when I was little. That was the case before I was born in the 60s. That was the case, I assume, in the 50s and 40s, and really throughout. Barack Obama was a gift because for those of us who covered the Tea Party movement, and I did, I was at CNBC in 2009 when the Tea Party movement happened. And I remember being asked to go cover it in Englewood Cliffs, New Jersey, a very big Tea Party protest that was happening in Englewood Cliffs, New Jersey. It so happened because CNBC's headquarters at the time were, and I think still are, based in Englewood Cliffs, and there happened to be one down the street. So I went, and I went with a camera crew, and what I found very interesting was that there was a humongous, and this is, early 2009, so Obama had just been inaugurated, a tremendous racial component to this. It wasn't that they were protesting uh, Obamacare or the bailout or whatever the Tea Party was ostensibly about. There was a massive racial component. including a picture of Obama morphing into um, a monkey-looking Hitler, right? So it wasn't that he was just Hitler, it was like he was a monkey-looking Hitler. Huge racial overtone to that. And, of course, if you're the Russians, that is manna from heaven because here you have effectively what they can portray as race riots and to otherize not just people that they used to otherize who live in quote unquote Harlem, which was always, as I kept saying, their byword for, racial disharmony, but the president of the United States. And then you go back to what we wrote about yesterday. And this, again, I'm giving a little bit more context to the story from yesterday, but you had a guy named Wayne Madsen appear on Russia Today in August of 2009, 6 months, 9 months after, about 8 months after Obama gets inaugurated. And he starts talking about birtherism, which had been an issue-ish during the election, but really exploded in 2010. So between 2008 and 2010, this guy goes on Russia Today in 2009 and strangely blames birtherism on Benjamin Netanyahu in Israel. So now we're bringing in the Jews, right? I mean, all of this was of a piece, right? It was to bring in all the people that the Soviets were constantly blaming for everything, right? The Jewish community, the racial disharmony in the United States. And all of that began what then happened, which is by 2010, RT, Russia Today, or later as it became known, RT, is running piece after piece after piece after piece on birtherism in order to create more of this disharmony. They have a woman named Orly Tights on. Orly Tights was, I remember her from my Fox days, out of her mind. Um, this woman who kept suing for, the court to throw her lawsuits out. She kept suing for, that Obama was not a natural born citizen. He couldn't, I mean, from Moldova, former Soviet Republic. I have no idea, what ended up happening. But Moldova by way of Israel and then comes here. World Net Daily, WND, which was run by a guy named Joseph Farah. So Joseph Farah's daughter is Alyssa Farah Griffin. I'm not suggesting that she whatsoever is involved in any of this, but her dad was Joseph Farah. Alyssa Farah Griffin was Trump's first communications director. Then now she's become sort of, I wouldn't say a never Trumper, but has broken from him, is on CNN. She's on The View. But the point is, Joseph Farah and WND, World Net Daily, start to really gin up this birther stuff. And that's how it kind of all begins, with RT playing a really interesting feedback loop with all of these places. And then it jumps. It jumps from WND and from Alex Jones and InfoWars and from all of these kind of Breitbart, from all of these kind of fringy white supremacist sites to the most trusted name in news, the number one cable news station in the nation, Fox News. And as soon as Roger Ailes, the former head of Fox News, my former boss, sees this, and I remember this so well, Trump goes on. Donald Trump, who remember at the time was doing The Apprentice, was not particularly, involved in this stuff, but decides that he's going to float his name to run for president in 2012. The reason he did that was he was looking for a new contract from The Apprentice. And this was a contract negotiation ploy, as was 16. People forget this. 16, he didn't really intend to run for president. He wanted NBC to give him a better contract. And when NBC didn't give him a better contract, he said, what the hell, I'm going to run. It was a ploy to run for president, to get a better contract. In 12, he tried the same thing. He got a better contract, which is why he did not run for president in 12. But he goes on in 2010, out of nowhere, seemingly, and says to George Stephanopoulos and then to The View, and then within a span of maybe 2 or 3 weeks, and then to Meredith Vieira on the Today Show, if you remember when she hosted the Today Show, I don't think I have questions about Obama. I don't know if he was born in Hawaii. That was the first question on ABC. 3 weeks later, he said that he had sent people to Hawaii, people, to look for Obama's real birth certificate, which he could not find. None of which was true, by the way. Somebody should ask Donald Trump, what did those people find and where's the findings? Because, of course, none of that ever existed. But within 2 seconds of him doing that, Fox News signs him to a short-term gig where he does something called Mondays with Trump. I remember this, I was at Fox at the time. He calls in and he, well, actually, I wasn't at Fox. I was at Fox. He calls in, and it doesn't even show up on set. I mean, once in a while he would, but would call in, from, his gold-plated toilet, wherever he was, and talk about birtherism on Fox and Friends every single Monday. And there's no better audience if you're trying to establish a Republican bona fides to talk to than the Fox News audience, and more relevantly, the Fox and Friends audience. And that is how the Russians were able to plant this early on and give Donald Trump a reason to talk about birtherism, which then got him on Fox, which then got him beloved by the Fox audience, which made them a kingmaker in terms of allowing him to get the Republican nomination. And this is just a small fraction of how this began. I mean, our
Yeah.
we laid this out in about 4,000 words. So if
Um,
you have some
um,
we have some time, go ahead and read it. But
and
it's
just to add, go ahead, finish.
no, that's go ahead.
And just to add that, again, Russia is not, master strategists, but they are very strategic as far as, employing the KGB playbook, which is targeting everything. 24/7, they are, have people assigned looking for any kind of discontent or any kind of divisions percolating in the US, in European countries, whatever part of the world. I mean, they're literally focused on every country in the world, specifically their target countries. So the minute they see any kind of percolation, they know to take every avenue. And this is why, like I said, this week we focused on how they targeted the far right media. We are also going to have to do a thing on how they targeted the far left.
Yep.
Um, how they targeted, the Nazis, how they targeted the evangelical community. Like they made sure to target every single thing. And not in 2015. They began laying the groundwork the minute they saw discontent after Obama won. The minute, I mean, literally, they sent someone to the U.S. They started making inroads with the Republican Party. Then you had, the Russian agent Butina and her handler Torshin running around the US between, the evangelical community, NRA, the Republican circles. And they very methodically made sure to infiltrate everything. And with social media and with the fact that what the KGB didn't have that we do, it's, one, cable news network, and two, so many websites. Because, I mean, when the KGB was in existence, there were only a handful of media outlets, a few news shows at a certain time that everyone watched. They didn't have this capability of, I hate call it, using 24 hour cycle cable news network, creating 10 million fictitious websites to spread disinformation, and then using social media to spread it and make sure that it taps everyone. Um, so this is, one of the things. And then we also in the article discussed the troll farm. And as soon as Prigozhin's, Internet Research Agency um, is formed, which it was formed initially for Russia's preparation to annex Crimea and invade and occupy Donbass. But how they shift the troll and bot farm specifically to the United States election and to Brexit, running both operations simultaneously. And you see then this whole thing of, what is happening in far right media appear on Russian media, appear be pushed out through troll and bot farms. And then you see this transatlantic thing happening, because then you have Steve Bannon, who opens up a Breitbart bureau in London to support Farage. You see Farage involved in US elections, and you just see, like you say, this feedback loop of it all, circling around, which was extremely effective, to the point um, that not only, which is what Russia is, a master of, questioning reality, creating a new reality. And this is what they excelled in the US, to the point that regular people, something that is fact, they don't want to believe it. And they really broke what facts are. I mean, and this is exactly where they excelled.
Yeah, and I think
Hmm.
it's just important for people to understand that it's not over.
No.
And in fact, if anything, they've really kind of perfected this to a large extent. Um, because not only if you think about what they did with if you think about what they did with WikiLeaks, for instance, right? With WikiLeaks, they hacked our intelligence services. I mean, basically concluded they hacked into the GRU, the Russian military intelligence, hacks into the Democratic National Committee over the course of basically a year, and gives it through a cutout, or maybe directly, unclear to me as to who Guccifer was and how it was done, but to WikiLeaks, to Julian Assange in London. That's that's a done deal. I mean, that's not debatable. They get Fox News, and not just Fox News. They get the number one show on Fox News at the time, Sean Hannity. I believe he was the number one, at least the number one or number two show on Fox News, to on a daily basis. And I mean, this I can vouch. Listen, the call is coming from inside the house. I was there on a daily
Mm.
basis to effectively say, almost not, I mean, he didn't say it, but to imply very strongly, leading the audience to believe that this poor guy, Seth Rich, who was murdered, I think in just a standard, I hate to say the standard Washington, D.C. murder, that he was um, somehow the person who was the leak, not the Russians. And the reason that happened was because within 5 minutes of Seth Rich dying, WikiLeaks tweets out, we're putting forward a $20,000 or whatever it was reward for information leading to this death, implying that he was a whistleblower and that's why they're doing it. I mean, completely orchestrated. And you had that happen. Now, again, the only person pushing back at the time was me, Fox, and I did not have this by any stretch of the imagination, the microphone there that Sean Hannity did or every other show there did. My little show was nothing compared to that. And the Russians had those useful idiots, and that's a charitable way to describe them, doing it there. This time around, you have Trump saying it's the Russia, Russia, Russia hoax. And the media is so afraid to touch anything Russia related because they don't want to be accused of being part of that hoax, that they're just allowing that to stand. I mean, when was the last time you had somebody except you and me, Olga, stand up there on a daily basis and say, this wasn't a hoax, this was for real, and here's why? Because
It
he's doing it.
hasn't happened, and it's not going to happen. And it frankly is, a disservice to Americans that media is not pushing back against this bullshit, because I mean, this
No.
is absolutely horrific. That you and I, frankly, have to waste our time to go back to 2016.
Yeah.
And like I said, we wouldn't be doing this if Trump wasn't preparing prosecutions, baseless ones, to go after anyone who did their job. followed their oath, defended this country to protect against an adversary who attacked the United States to implode it from within.
And I want to be very clear, and I wanna give a plug out to your Substack today because I think it's important if people haven't gone to Olga's Substack today to read it. Um, the Russian well, you can go ahead and say it. The only thing I'm gonna say after before you describe what you said is the media, what Olga's about to tell you is kind of a blip on the media's radar. I mean, I could go to the New York Times, page right now, and I'm gonna see, is it there? Is it not there? Um, I don't necessarily see that it's anywhere blaring on the front page of the New York Times. Olga, why don't you go ahead and talk about what happened today and why the Russians continue to infiltrate our media, but now they're doing it not even because of the way they did it in 16 or 15 in the years leading up to 15 or 16. Now, just the media is just scared of mentioning anything Russia related because they don't want to be accused of being part of a hoax. So go ahead, Olga.
And just before we wrap up this section and I talk about the article, um, I just want to make it clear what's more dangerous now is that whereas, the MAGA movement basically, received a lot of assistance from Russia. They amplified them. They did everything to make sure that their divisive propaganda and disinformation gets out. What scares me the most is that the MAGA movement has learned the tactics now. So they don't need Russia. And I've seen them split, and you can actually see within the MAGA movement who is a Russian shill and who is not when it came to key things like the Iran bombing. And Epstein and whatnot. So you see the split, which makes it easy for me to flush out, who's just like part of MAGA for Trump, who is part of MAGA as a Russian show, but the tactics are identical. I mean, they've really adapted the tactics. So even if Russia were to step out today from the United States and say that's it, we're not running any more information warfare operations, what the media, what the propagandists and all the influencers and the journalists and everyone learned is identical, and they can continue carrying out these operations without even the assistance of Russia, which they're still continuing to do and increasing. Now, what you were talking about yesterday, something happened that I honestly, frankly, wish I could get back into a normal timeline where things make sense. The EU commissioner was on her way to Bulgaria and her plane was hit with GPS jamming. They had to land the plane successfully without her dying, using paper maps, which, old school. But the bottom line is that Russia, while Putin, while he's in China, sucking up to Xi, used the opportunity to target a top EU leader to
The
target
top
her plane,
the top EU leader.
the top EU leader, target her plane. I mean, they've been running these jamming operations. I can't tell you, it must be now in the thousands between the Nordic and Baltic countries. I believe it's like 4 out of 5 airplanes in Estonia can't land properly because Russia has been jamming the GPS. Um, And this has been going on close to 2 years, and Europe, for the most part, has ignored it. There have been articles written about it, but this is very serious. Like they are waiting for a plane crash to happen. Here, the fact the top EU leader was targeted for basically, I would call it an assassination attempt. What if it would have worked? What if her plane would have crashed? And this is not the top story in the United States is mind blowing because in a normal timeline, if the Russian government or the Chinese government or the Iranian government targeted a leader of a Western country or of Europe or, it would have been the main news 24/7. And literally, it was the blip. And That's what I wrote about today because I honestly, I mean, first of all, this just shows that after Trump, rolled out the red carpet, for Putin in Alaska, that Russia has become even more emboldened. And not only did they target her plane, which again could have resulted in deadly consequences, but they also struck in Ukraine, Western Ukraine, far Western Ukraine, the British and EU consulates. So they're targeting, and an American factory. They're specifically right now in the past week targeting Western
Or was.
targets.
So I think before we wrap up, the reason that this particular week is so critical is not just because it relates to 2016, which is our mission at Active Measures, but because what you saw in the years leading up to 16, which I would say really started 08, 09, but really went
Yep.
into high gear with Obama's election about
Mm.
obviously 4 years before, no, 8 years, excuse me, before 2016. Why that's so relevant is because you have the embers of that being stoked so much that the Russians did such an incredible job of infiltrating our media that our quote unquote legacy media, our mainstream media, not our right wing media, but our New York Times, our Washington Post, our Wall Street Journals, all of those, our ABCs, NBCs, CBSs, are so terrified of being accused of being part of the quote unquote Russia hoax. It's become such a joke that they're staying away from anything Russia. That's not dead to rights. The fact that the head of the European Union almost died because the Russians affirmatively jammed her GPS on her plane as she was flying into a former Soviet satellite country should scare the hell out of all of us, but it should scare the hell out of us more for those of us living in the West that the United States media, and I cannot speak to what's going on in the UK or other, certainly in the EU countries, but uh, the fact that this is not breaking news everywhere today is just underscores exactly how much the Russians infiltrated. The fact that Donald Trump said that we are going to be the most respected country in the world once he got elected, that nobody respected us when Obama was around, nobody respected us when Biden was around, but now that he's back, everybody respects us. And the media is saying nothing, as yesterday Xi Jinping and Modi and Putin were meeting in China. And by the way,
With
guess
Kim Jong Un on
guess
the
who's showing
way.
up? Guess who's showing up? Who probably already arrived by now, but guess who's on his private train headed up to China right now? Of course, Kim Jong Un. It's not a surprise to me that Kim Jong Un and Xi and Putin are hanging out, but Modi, who this country has been working overtime to bring over to us for the last several decades, not just Modi, but his predecessors in India, now is aligning himself with that cast of characters purely because Donald Trump is upset that Modi did not say, yes, you deserve the Nobel Peace Prize for ending a war between India and Pakistan, which P.S. never took place. Or if it did take place, it's the same war that's been taking place for the last 50, 60, 80 years and will continue to take place long after Donald Trump is gone, is absurd. Absurd. And effectively a signal from one of the largest economies in the world and the second largest economy in the world, China, that, hey, if you guys want to put tariffs on us, go ahead, but we can do business without you. That's not respect. That's the middle finger. And where do you see the media pointing that out? So,
What about what about the fact that Trump lashed out only at Modi, not at Xi, not at Putin?
not a Xi and
Uh,
Putin. Yeah, and
just
certainly
as
not
Modi.
and not at his good friend Kim Jong Un, with whom he exchanged, and I quote, "love letters" back in the day. I mean, this is all stuff that we're gonna talk more about on Pax Americana on Thursday. The only reason I bring it up now, and Olga, I think you agree with me, the only reason we're bringing it up now is because it underscores that what began now 15 years ago, if not longer, is now effectively becoming a problem that's extended way above and beyond what we saw before. And whereas you had infiltration of the right wing media by Russia back then, is not even close to what you're seeing now, which is effectively just the media throwing up their arms and saying, anything Russia related, we're not really going to touch because we don't want to be accused of anything. We don't want to be accused of being part of a hoax. We don't want to get Trump mad at us. Trump seems to be very angry anytime Russia gets brought up. So we're not, we've got bigger fish to fry. It's a problem. So if you have not
Big.
read our, yeah, go ahead, Olga.
No,
Anything else
it's a
you want?
big problem.
Yeah. If you have not read our this week's installment, excuse me, of Active Measures, please do. Go to our website, Salty Politics, or I'm Asking Russia, and read it on either of our websites. We will be back again next week with another installment. I think we're going to be talking about Miss America, Miss Universe next week, Olga. Is that what we're
We have
doing?
to debate.
Yeah,
Either that or maybe the birth of the troll farm,
the
so
troll
people can
farms. Right,
understand
right.
how
Yeah,
insidious these troll and bot farms were.
we touched on that a little bit today, this week, with the Internet Research Agency, with Prigozhin, who's now somewhere in the ether after he was murdered by Putin. Although we shouldn't really sob or cry for him, but we touched on that a little bit
Although
today. Yeah.
I still have the crazy thought and had an argument with
That he may not be dead.
ChatGPT. Yeah, with ChatGPT, and had ChatGPT concede that he might still be alive after feeding my thoughts to it. Anything to try. This, by the way, is the what I worry next, because Russia's going to definitely infiltrate AI, which is going to make it even more difficult to find out what is fact from fiction. But
Um,
yes, we'll be
Tom,
back next
Thomas
week.
Thomas Friedman has a very frightening column in the New York Times today about AI and the future of AI, if you want to be scared. We'll be back next week, next Monday, with a new edition of Active Measures. We will see you back here next Tuesday at 12:30 Eastern for another episode of Active Measures, following up on yesterday's or next Monday's newsletter. And then we will see you all back here at 11 a.m. Eastern this Thursday for another episode of Pax Americana. We'll be breaking down a lot more of this middle finger to the United States that Vladimir Putin and the axis of evil, plus Modi, who's not part of the axis of evil, although not surprising that he wants to send a message to Trump.
I am not surprised with Modi, because if I could, I can't even begin to emphasize how much he has assisted Russia and its genocidal invasion, not
Yeah,
only with just buying oil, but actually, Indian companies providing
yep,
components and, dual use military
technology.
components
Yep.
and technology and everything else. So I'm not surprised with him. But we'll be back. Just a reminder, if you have not signed up for September 17th, we are going to have a 6-week seminar on disinformation, information warfare, and ways to combat it. Tactics that have been useful in Ukraine, Estonia, and other countries, that have been dealing with this, actually dealing with it and not just talking about it. So if you have not signed up, we will be I was starting the seminar September 17th. There's the registration link, both on Julie and my Substacks. I put it also into anything that I
Yep.
write. And we'll both refresh it and give people a reminder. It's a 6-week seminar on Zoom, where we will be going through the methodology of information warfare and things we can do ourselves since we have a failing government to fight back.
Yep, and that is for paid subscribers. So if you have not yet become a paid subscriber, you don't have to subscribe to both Olga's and mine. It'd be nice if you did, but if you're not a paid subscriber to both, either one is fine. You don't. We're not gonna make people subscribe to both of ours, but
No.
whichever one you already subscribed to, if it's a paid subscriber, sign up. We'd love to have you. We have a bunch of people sign up for this already, Olga. So I'm really
A
excited about
few
that.
hundred.
Yeah,
So
and that's yeah, and we have
I'm very excited, and it's something, and then we'll also be sending out slides after each session so people can, uh, remember, and have like the main information and focus more on how to combat it because there are effective ways to combat it. And, it is up to all of us to do this.
Sounds good. All right, everybody. Thanks so much. We'll see you Thursday at 11 a.m. for Pox Americana and right back here again at 12:30 Eastern next Tuesday for another episode of Active Measures. Thanks. Bye.
Hi, everyone.